Hello again. So I'm getting ready to introduce Nipun Mehta, and he is a lover of stories, so I'm going to tell you a quick story. And this is from a book called The Sermon on the Mount According to Vedanta, which is a nice marriage of Christianity and Hinduism. So in this story, there is a wise guru, and we'll call him, say, like Sri Ramakrishna. And Ramakrishna is out in the world doing his guru things, and he comes home to his humble hut, which has just a few possessions, and there is a thief in the humble hut. And the thief sees Ramakrishna, and he gathers up Ramakrishna's very few belongings, and he races out the door. And on his way out, as he crosses the threshold, he drops Ramakrishna's bowl. Ramakrishna rushes over to the threshold, picks up the bowl, and runs after the thief. I think you know the punchline already. He gets to where the thief is, and he finds him, and the thief looks at him defiantly, clutching all of Ramakrishna's possessions. And Ramakrishna extends the bowl out to the thief, and he says, "I think you dropped this. This is yours, my brother." And it is said that the thief falls to his knees, so overwhelmed with the act of kindness. And in that moment, he is instantly transformed. I share this story today because it so embodies the values of service space. They are paradoxical. They are kind beyond any rational idea of kindness. They are deeply, deeply spiritual and loving. And one of the geniuses behind Service Space is our brother, Nipun Mehta. Nipun started Service Space with a gathering of friends, and it has grown into an organization that has over 500,000 members. It's worldwide. They have many, many portals of good, Kind Spring, Daily Good, all kinds of wonderful things. And their work is about disarming the status quo, about moving into places of kindness where kindness makes no sense. Nipun is a global speaker. He is the recipient of the Dalai Lama's Unsung Hero Award, but mostly, he is our friend. Let's join together and welcome Nipun Mehta.
Thank you. Well, going after Bonnie's introduction, and Brian before that, I feel like I want to start with the story. But I can't do the how old is he? But I'll do it in a Brian alpha version. I want to start with this question of what's after mindfulness, share a few stories, and then invite two other speakers as well during the course of this presentation. So what's after mindfulness? If you had to ask me, I would use this word. I would say kindfulness. And kindfulness in the sense of generosity, right, which was the first parami, the sense of service to other people, selfless service. There was a story that really moved me when I first heard it of a previous Buddha, Buddha Kassapa. Whenever these big philanthropists, even kings, would come to the Buddha and ask him, it says, I'd like to grow in generosity, I'd like to grow ultimately in Dharma. He would say, well, you should go to my chief philanthropy officer. His chief philanthropy officer was a potter, a humble potter who lived in a straw hut with his parents. His name was Chatikara. And so every time people would go to him and he would sit down and he would have these conversations. One day it turned out that the Buddha in his monastery, with all these monks, he was in need himself. It was raining, it was monsoon, and the rain was falling through part of the ceiling. They said, we need some straw. Where do we go? He says, go to my chief philanthropy officer. So they went to Chatikara's hut. Chatikara wasn't home, but his parents were there, and so these monks, they didn't know, the parents didn't know these monks that had come. They says, we have come from the Buddha. Buddha asked us to come and request some straw from your home. Now, both the parents were blind. They couldn't see. And they says, I don't know if we have spare straw, but we understand that our hut is made of straw. So why don't you take some from our ceiling right here? And they must have known that this was something that was to happen, and so they actually took a little bit of the ceiling. go back. Chatikara comes home, he looks at his parents, he looks at this gaping hole in the hut, and he asks his parents what happened. He says, the Buddha sent his monks for some straw. And so we gave it. And Chatikara was so moved, it is said, that for 2 weeks he fell into this incredible state of samadhi. For 2 weeks he stayed in this very high state, just by knowing that, the Buddha doesn't have a shortage of straw. He doesn't have a shortage of people and benefactors, but he decided to send his monks to this humble home, because this humble home was home not just to giving of stuff, but the art of giving, the art of kindfulness. And so if you ask me what I have learned through this process of service, through this process of growing in generosity, I would say 3 fundamental things. One is make offerings. Now, offerings is very different than charity. Charity, we say, hey, I want to give, I have and you don't have, I feel sorry for you, I want to give. It's a little bit of sympathy. Maybe there's some benefit to it, but that's a really low bandwidth way of giving. How do you move from that sympathy to empathy to deep compassion? Rachel Naomi Remen has a beautiful quote. She says, when you help, you see the world as broken. When you help, you see the world as weak. When you fix, you see the world as broken. When you serve, you see the world as a co-creative whole. But offering takes it one step further. He says, when you offer, you're actually the one benefiting. And so you're grateful, although you're giving, you're grateful. Thank you for the opportunity to give, for the opportunity to transform myself. And so that's a very fundamental idea, make offerings. Second idea is to receive offerings. My wife and I, and in the last 3 years my mom as well, have been making offerings to the local monastery every week, every Thursday these days. We offer food to the monks, which has been a fantastic opportunity. But when you look deeply at this, and if you were to ask me, who benefits? Is it the monks that get food? Yeah, they do. But actually, it is us that's benefiting the most. The monks are making themselves available so that we, people like me and my wife, can grow in generosity, and through that generosity, we can transform ourselves. And so in that sense, to receive offerings and to be available for people to practice generosity is also a very profound part of this process. And then lastly, I've learned to trust karma. Trust in the self-organizing ways of the universe. You can frame it in so many different ways, but how do you just allow that trust in the emergence? And so we looked at this back in 1999, and we said, how do you operationalize this? These are these 3 ideas, they make sense. Make offerings, be available to receive offerings, and trust in the self-organizing ways of the universe. You say, okay, that makes sense. How do you operationalize it? And so we had, back in 1999, in the height of the Silicon Valley greed, we decided to go out to a homeless shelter, and we said, how can we help? We helped them build a website. We would end up building thousands of different websites. And those websites turned into so many different projects. Now it's a whole ecosystem that touches millions of people every month. It's called service-based. But to know service-based isn't to actually know the projects. To know service-based is to really know its 3 core organizing principles. And what's interesting is that all 3 of those map very closely to these 3 practices. So make offerings. You can't make offerings if you're transactional. You can't make offerings if you want something in return, even if you're thinking of getting something in return. So we decided we're going to be all volunteer run. Receive offerings. You can't receive offerings if you're going out and seeking, if you're insecure, because then you're not going to be available for generosity. You're not going to benefit the giver as a receiver. So we decided to do something radical. It's like no fundraising. Trust what's going to come your way. Think outside the financial capital box. Right? There are so many other forms of capital. can we actually create some magic with alternate, non-financial forms of capital? So that was our experiment. And trust. And when you trust in karma, there's a lot of people who say, look, there's so much suffering in the world, we need to do something, we need to find our agency, we need to create this change. But most of those people who are very passionate in that good sort of a way too, you can say, end up burning out. Because it's not regenerative. When the weight of the world stands on your shoulders, it is heavy. And so for us, the third principle was do small acts. And because we're in a web of consciousness that is so deeply interrelated, it is invariably, inevitably going to create this ripple effect. And so these three principles, you can look at the opposite of all of this, and that's usually what was happening in the Silicon Valley, right? You have lots of staff, you raise lots of money, and you go out and try to change the world. And we said, well, we didn't have an idea of how we're going to change the world. Who knows how long we stand? We have nothing. And, we're just doing it as a labor of love. And back then, people thought we were crazy. Well, some of them probably still think we're crazy, but we're still standing, still around. So this has been, the series of experiments that we've done with service-based. And if you ask me, well, what have you learned? I think one of the big things that happens is usually when you go out and try to change the world in a values-driven way, right? Not with anger, with compassion in your heart, we usually start with an impact statement. This is what I want to change in the world. For that impact, you need projects. So you create a project plan. Makes sense. This is how we usually do things. Then you say, to implement, I need to have people. So you hire staff. And then those staff, may or may not experience some kind of inner transformation. Right? You'll have your HR groups, you'll have your company policies. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Maybe they're better people at the end of the day, maybe not, but the core purpose is impact. Now, in the service-based way of doing things, this was the total opposite. What we decided to do is start with inner transformation. And when you give, when you make offerings, anywhere, anytime, even here, you go out and you do a small little act of kindness, invariably, it's going to create these affinities. And over time, that's naturally going to attract people, magnetize people. And those people, when they come together in such a wholesome way, you think they're just going to sit around and look at each other? No, they're going to create projects. And what do you think those projects are going to do? They're going to create impact in the world. So this is a completely flip way of creating change in the world while leading with inner transformation. There's a beautiful quote. I think it was spotted at like a Zendo once. It says, chant the sutra with your ears. Talk the Dharma without the words. Isn't it St. Francis of Assisi says, preach always, use words only when necessary. We've actually not even found it necessary to talk all these years about this. There's no religion. We don't use the Dharma word even. Just say compassion, kindness, love. And guess what? So many people are touched by it in so many different ways. And organically, by the propensity of nature, they are moved in this direction of the greater good in their own personal journeys. It's been a remarkable thing for me to just witness. So if you were to ask me, after 20 years of service-based, after so many different experiments that have gone in so many different directions, what have you learned? I would leave you with these 4 insights. The first one is that the font is off. The first one is, I could have sworn we reviewed it and everything. First one is, everyone is good at something. We tend to look at the world with sort of a deficit mindset. This is what's lacking here. This is what, this is what could be improved. This is a problem that creates suffering. But how do you start to look at things in an asset-based way? What are the different assets? And this is a very fundamentally, this has been a very spiritual process. Einstein said, I guess there's some debate, but nonetheless, this is a great quote. Whoever said it, is that everyone's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's going to live its whole life believing it is stupid. And this, unfortunately, is what we often do because we don't ask this question of what are other forms of wealth, non-financial forms of wealth. We have, community, attention, as you see. Attention used to be, like we used to be able to pay attention for 12 seconds, but we have made some innovative progress in that direction, and we are actually now at 8 seconds. Fish used to have the lowest of all species, and now it's human beings. So how do you start to think in terms of time capital, compassion capital, nature capital? What are the different currencies that allow this kind of wealth to circulate in the world? So I think we have to hold these questions. Reverend Hank Scher, who's here, whom you heard yesterday, he is a remarkable puppeteer, as you saw. He's also a great musician. He came out with a CD. But when he came out with the CD, he had an option. Can I accept other forms of wealth, non-financial forms of wealth? And he says, let's do acts of kindness. And so this was his recipe for downloading the CD. You perform a priceless act of kindness, write and submit your reflections, and check your email for a link to download the album. Of course, from a monk, what do you expect, right? That's what you would get. But at the same time, it's profound when you start to include people in this way. So many of you know that at even this conference, usually when you go to an Eventbrite page, you say, we accept Visa, MasterCard, and Discover. But we decided to experiment, and this has been the first conference where we've done this, and I think we've actually built this portal called On Tickets. And so we said, we're going to accept other forms of wealth. You can do 7 acts of kindness and offer kindness wealth. Tell us the stories. You can do creativity wealth. Create a video for 5 minutes and share that video about what mindfulness means to you. You can offer silence wealth. Do 8 hours of meditation and write a reflection. And so many people did all this, and community wealth, and volunteer. And throughout this, right, this is a young woman. This is one amongst you. A 4-year-old who was with her mom at Trader Joe's, and she's just sitting down at the checkout. And at the checkout, she befriends this woman to her left, an elderly woman. They don't know each other. She learns that this woman is reading a book. Why are you reading a book? Oh, I'm just waiting for my bus. They said, so where are you going? She's going about 10 minutes away. So this mom and her daughter decided to give them a ride home. It's a simple act of kindness, but you can imagine so much value, right? This is a quote. It says, at a grocery store, my 4-year-old saw an elderly woman waiting for a bus. Her home was 10 minutes away, so we dropped her home. And she says, my daughter's youthful presence brought a smile to her day, and we all gained a new friendship. We promised to visit and have lunch with her at a future date. Well, these things have value. When you do 7 of these acts of kindness versus financial capital, you can't really compare the two, but you know that both of them have value. So how do we learn to honor these other forms of value? We had some incredible people do artwork to brighten people's day. Feed Grandpa his favorite food. Sage actually read a post on Facebook saying, hey, I'd love to clean, but I don't have these cleaning supplies. I can't afford it. Can anyone help? So Sage picked up a whole bunch of supplies, created a goodie bag of cleaning things, and dropped it off. Complete stranger. Elizabeth made these little gifts and went and offered it to strangers. Now, you start to do that, and you see that there's so much profound value to all of this that often doesn't get measured or considered even. This is a UC Berkeley student. She says, I'm going to offer silence wealth. This is right here at the Eucalyptus Groves. For those of you that are local, there's this beautiful grove on the campus, and she's sitting down. She decided to sit in that position on that tree for 8 hours. And she writes, she says, after 8 hours of meditation, I looked up at the towering trees. I saw the smooth, tender bark covering the tree trunks as rougher barks were shedding off. Every now and then, leaves fell. Branches were on the ground. Just like the trees, I also don't have a permanent identity. I am constantly changing. She wrote a very long essay. This is just an excerpt from it. And it's not like she's enlightened, of course. She says, yet society keeps teaching me to define my identity and sell myself. Right? I struggle to adopt the no-self when I need to build a shining resume. Right? How do you juxtapose writing a resume with no self, right? I think it's a fantastic question. We should have a panel on it next time. Says the battle is ongoing. She's holding these questions. And what an incredible offering to say, I want to be in this community of people who are trying to reach higher ground. And here is a space. Diana and Coleman, you'll get to see them later in the day. They said, yeah, we want to accept alternate forms of wealth. And Obama, we got Obama to say, agree to this with his own stamp on it. And he said we should remember that capital is not just financial, it's social, informational, experiential, spiritual, emotional, cultural. And actually, there's a million different forms of capital. We're missing them in the systems of today. And we're not able to solve problems like inequality. We're not able to solve problems like climate change. We're not able to solve or even understand problems of artificial intelligence. I think we'll need to innovate. And I think these values, which are so central to Buddhism, can offer a lot. So the second big insight is, if the first one is that everyone can be good at something, everyone has a gift to offer. The second one is, not only does everyone have a gift to offer, they actually want to give it. Everyone can be great at giving. Martin Luther King Jr. says, everyone can be great because everyone can serve. Everyone wants to serve, but we often don't have avenues to make that happen. So I want to invite one of our superstar volunteers, Melissa Stevens. I call her Miss Stevens because she's a middle school teacher. She's a person with just a big, bright light around her, and that light will also be around her. And she's just, she's written a book. She's a hero for so many everyday folks. She's a person I'm delighted to call a friend. So give it up for Melissa Stevens.
Hi, friends. I will tell you, first of all, following Nipun is not an enviable position, but I will do my best here. My name is Melissa Stevens, and I'm so honored and grateful to be here. Both of my parents actually earned their masters at Berkeley, and I was not quite Cal qualified, so to be on the stage is really pretty amazing. I'm so encouraged by hearing how many people on the panels are talking about children when they're talking about solutions to everything that's going on. I have been a middle school teacher for 24 years. I often get a reaction of, oh my God, really? To, oh, that must be so fun. And it's all of those things. It's also incredibly challenging because our kids are changing and they have so many more challenges. And just to be able to serve them is such an honor for me. So I am just kind of going to talk about what I have done. I work with 5th through 8th graders, but I teach a 7th grade service class. That is my absolute favorite. I based it all completely on my experience with service-based. So I always give them full credit whenever I'm introducing a new concept to my kids. I'm like, and I got this from service-based, so there's no copyright infringements or anything. But was able to, we had a need at our school for an extra enrichment class for the 7th graders, and I had been thinking about, God, I'm 51. I didn't start kind of down this path until about 10 years ago, and if I had just been introduced more to the idea of being able to serve and gratitude at a younger age, that I could have been, maybe had a little more healing more quickly on my journey. And so I'd been thinking about this idea of, oh man, it would be amazing to have a class in 7th grade is like the perfect age for it, because they're old enough to have these incredible conversations, but they're not like, the 8th graders are already on to high school and, well into puberty, so you can't really catch them as much. So when it came up, I pitched it to our principal, so I'd really love to teach this class, and then I took it to the board and it got approved. So the biggest thing when I start with the kids on the first day is just asking them, what is service to you? Like, what is giving? What does that mean? And I teach in Marin, I teach in Kentfield. It's a really wealthy district. It's very expensive. So often the results that I will hear, their answers are like, oh, like sitting on the foundation of a charity, and then you do a big fundraiser, and I'm thinking, yes, that's true, but at the same time, it's, showing them that exactly what Nipun is saying, like everybody can do something small. I will never, that I can imagine, have $1 million to start my own school. But every day I can show up and I can just love them and honor them and value them. And for me, that's the service that I can give beyond the curriculum. Like, I always feel like if you just get them wanting to come to school, everything else will fall into place. So the way that we start our class, every class when I'm taking roll, and again, I got this from a service-based retreat, is I'll call their name. I have them make eye contact with me. That's the hardest thing for middle schoolers. They look down a lot. I was a middle schooler who looked down a lot. I looked down a lot for a lot of years. So for me, the eye contact thing is so important. So I'll call their name. We make eye contact. I will say, I see you, and they have to say, I'm here. And I tell them that doesn't just mean like, oh, I see that you're in the room and you're not going to be marked tardy, but I really see you. And when they're telling me that they're here, they're not saying, yeah, I'm here, don't mark me tardy. They're saying, I'm ready, I'm present, I'm ready to begin. And then we talk about what are some of the ways that they can serve. They all have to do a service project. And inevitably, when you ask the kids, what do you want to do? I think I'll do a bake sale. And I was like, okay, I love me a good bake sale. However, we can go beyond that. So we'll start brainstorming these other forms of capital rather than trying to do something where we're earning money. Can you just do something where you're connecting with the community? And they've come up with amazing ideas. Some of the kids have written just note cards, and they just have a stand on the corner, and they'll say, pick a card, try your luck, or whatever it is. And then the person will pick a card and it says, tell me a story from your childhood. And they'll do that. And the next one might say, tell me your favorite knock-knock joke. And that's their service project. And they're always like, wait, that's community service? Like, yes, like you are serving your community. It doesn't mean it has to be something grand or what your preconceived notion of what that is. And I think when we start at the younger ages, when we start talking about climate change and we start talking about getting away from this whole idea of greed and money and more is better, especially in a place like Marin, it really will start taking root in this next generation. It's what gives me hope every day, because it can sometimes be hopeless. Oh my God, I'm like, are they getting the hook? Okay, so, and so for me, that's what is really so important. And the way that, so we start our day every day with, I see you, I'm here. And the little way for me to serve, I think for all of us as parents and leaders and teachers and anyone, is role modeling for these kids. It's one thing to say something to them, but it's another thing to experience something with them. So I always try to tell them that. If I make a mistake in class, I own it. I say, wow, I really blew it. You're correct. I don't come from an attitude of, I'm going to tell you how life is. So I realized, probably the first 18 years of my career, I thought I was, it was a lot of ego. It was a lot of, what can I share with you all? And in the past several years, I realized it's about amplifying their voices. And that's really what I've been trying to do. So at the end of the day, when the bell rings, they have to line up every time. I can either give them a high five or a hug. We have to make eye contact again, and I thank them. Sorry. I was so close to making it. I just feel so honored to be in this position with kids. It's a big responsibility, but it's an amazing one. And so I thank them every day when they leave my classroom. And they know that I mean it. It's not just words. And if they look down, I'm like, eyes, until they look up. Because I think that that's where we have to start. Now, we have to start with the kids. And we need to really instill this sense of service within them, but starting with themselves. When you talk about inner transformation, it's the only way that it's going to change things. So thank you for allowing me to be here. Thank you for seeing me. And thank you.
So the third insight, once everyone starts giving, is that if that giving gets connected, it creates a gift ecology. And an easy way to understand this, I don't know how many of you guys know about Karma Kitchen. Most of you know, probably. Berkeley folks would know. For so many years, we've been hosting these here and now in 23 places around the world. I was just at Karma Kitchen in Warsaw a couple days ago. You walk into a restaurant and you get served a meal like at any other restaurant, but at this pop-up restaurant, your check is going to read 0 because someone before you has paid for you. You don't know them. You can't say thank you to them. You are trusted to pay it forward for people after you. How valuable is that, right? That experience, it's not a food experience. You're taking a common food experience of transaction and expanding it into an experience of empathy and hopefully even deeper than that into compassion. And so it's very profound what can happen when you move from this kind of transaction to trust. Right? If it's all karmic and we have this infinite faith in karma and you're planting the right kinds of seed, then why would you really worry about it? And of course, very high-level monks do live in this way, but all of us can experience and practice that. And Karma Kitchen becomes a place to practice, because otherwise, where else do you practice? But we can apply this. It's all volunteer-run. It's amazing. We have endless stories around it. But you can apply this in so many ways. This is Richard, also based out of Oakland. He said, you know, I've been running a magazine for about 15 years, and I do subscriptions, just like all other magazines do. But I'm moved by this idea to go from transaction to trust, and I will know. He took away all dollar signs, and he says, from now on, only offerings of gratitude. Because offerings of gratitude is also going to benefit the giver a whole lot more than a transaction. This is a fellow in India who runs his rickshaw in the same way. You sit in his rickshaw and no charge. Not because it's free, but because someone before you paid for you. How would you like to pay it forward? And everyone says, hey, how does it work? You know, he's like talk of the town. And he says, I just believe in love. I believe that if I give to you, generosity begets more generosity. Smiles begets more smiles. Love begets more love. And he says, I'm willing to put my whole livelihood on the line. And when you sit in that rickshaw, it's not Bill Gates teaching you about philanthropy and love. It's an everyday rickshaw driver. It's profound. So, you know, if you go through the 3 insights, if we lead with this idea of transformation-driven service, we say, hey, everyone is good at something. When everyone has a gift, we realize that everyone not only is good at something, but instead of selling your gifts in the market, you can actually give them away. And we want to. There's so much neuroscience behind this as well. And if that generosity gets engaged, it creates a gift ecology. And then, in the context of these deep relationships of gratitude, of compassion, I would say, if such a gratitude network does form, you arrive at the 4th idea, which is that everyone is deeply and profoundly connected to everything. We talk about interconnection, but if we bypass the first 3 stages, you're really just working at a cognitive level. Right? You're not really going to stop wars in the world because you don't really have any of the foundation for it. So you can sit and say, yeah, I'm interconnected to you. But how deep is that experience? How deep are we going into our subconscious and feeling it with other people? Feeling it with all life, not just people. So this idea of everyone being connected to everything is so powerful, but when it's supported by this foundation of sincere cultivation, I think it becomes very profound for us individually and collectively. So I want to invite a friend to share a quick short story. His name is Makala Kozo Hattori. He's from Hawaii. He used to be a surfer. He's a dad. He's just a loving human being, and he has just been a courageous example of how to embody these principles. So welcome, Kozo!
Aloha kako. Welcome to us all with love. I'd like to share a quick story about how ripples of kindness can connect us in ways that maybe we never thought possible. In 2015, I was diagnosed with stage 2 colorectal cancer. And being a spiritual person, I decided to forego chemo, radiation, and surgery and try alternative natural healing practices. One of the first things you learn on the cancer journey is you need a strong social support system. And I always thought that meant, you have people to drive you to your appointments, take care of your kids when you're fatigued, make you meals. But my service friends taught me a whole new definition of social support. For 2 years, my service friends held me in non-judgmental, compassionate, caring embrace. And that wasn't the norm. Because colorectal cancer has a high prognosis, if you do chemo, radiation, and surgery, many of my other friends, family members, and doctors were really upset with me. They consider my actions irresponsible. I have 2 children. And my primary care physician, in fact, dropped me as a patient, and he said, "I don't want to stand by and watch you kill yourself." So my service friends acted in a completely different way, and they just held me. They held space for me. Rather than taking a stand, they held space. About 1.5 years into my experiments and treatment, I weighed about 116 pounds, and I normally weigh about 160 to 155. And I went to a meditation circle, and one of my service friends gave me a hug, and she said, "Kozo, you're disappearing." There was no judgment there, just an observation. And I didn't think about it at the time, but later when I got home, I realized that not only was I disappearing, but that in a way I wanted to disappear. In my twisted spiritual logic, I had decided that my life was broken. My body was broken. My marriage was broken. My career was in shambles. We were having financial troubles. And I had unconsciously decided that I would disappear and then come back in another life, be reborn with a new life, a new chance, a new body, a new chance at relationships, a new chance at career. And when this service friend told me this, she put this in front of my face, I was at a crossroads, and I had to decide, did I want to choose to live this broken life or continue to disappear? And because of that unconditional love I received from those service friends, I chose life. And in 2017, I opened my body and my mind to people who I'd formerly considered my enemies, namely Western medicine and my surgeons. And they removed the tumor. And I've been cancer-free ever since. Thank you. I can honestly say that I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that unconditional love, beauty, generosity I received from those service friends. And how do you repay that? How do you repay life given? How do I repay the moments I get to spend with my sons? Because I had forfeited that in a way when I thought, in my twisted monkey mind logic, that they would be better off with my life insurance policy than with me with them every day. How do you repay that? As Harshita Auntie and Dinesh Uncle, who have been hosting Awakened Circles at their house for 23 years, often remind us, you can't pay it back. You can only pay it forward. And so that's what I try to do today. I try to pay forward that same unconditional, non-judgmental space that was held for me. As Ajahn Brahm said yesterday, there are no perfect trees in the forest. We are all scarred, twisted, turned, and going through struggles. So I try to hold space for everybody in that forest. I'm so grateful to have been served, but also for being taught how to serve. Thank you so much. Malama Pono, please take care.
So real quick, because monks have to go to lunch, and that would be bad karma if we delay the monks. If we take, the reason why this idea of interconnection is very relevant right now is because as you zoom out, everyone is talking about this, but just not in a deep enough way. And I think this is where these Buddhist values really have a big contribution to play. In the TV sort of broadcast world, you have in a room full of 50 people, 50 connections. Right? If it was 50 of us and me, right now you can't interact with me, so you have 50 connections. In a telephone network where you can all talk to each other, everyone can talk to each other, you have 1,225 connections. But in an internet era, in a many-to-many network, what we are now seeing, what we see in a room full of just 50 people, this is math, is 100 million trillion connections. So how do you go from this one-to-many to one-to-one to many-to-many? And this would have been a mystical idea. Yeah, we're all connected. There's 100 million trillion connections, sure. Except now, it's a very concrete idea, very present in our culture today, because we have seen this play itself out for profit. We have seen this play itself out for protest. This is Tahrir Square. No money, no centralized leader, no organization, mobilized so much, created unprecedented change, but we have not yet seen it for kindfulness. We have not seen enough examples of applying these capacities for kindfulness. And I think to end, I'll just give you this quote by the Buddha. Ananda, who had this perfect memory, asked the Buddha at some point, hey, it seems like half the holy life is about noble friendships, because Buddha would talk often about it. And he says, well, no, not really, Ananda, it's not half, it's actually the whole of holy life. And so to create these noble friendships, we first need to tap into that generosity, that selflessness, which then allows us to create these very deep bonds that you cannot create with the profit motive. You cannot create with an anger motive, but you can create with a generosity motive. Thank you very much. Let's all spread love together. I want to invite these guys real quick. Come, race. Give them a round of applause. Yeah. Awesome. We'll take a bow. And we'll run to avoid bad karma. Here we go.